The New York State Senate followed the Assembly this week and passed the Medical Aid in Dying Act. Under the bill, terminally ill people given less than 6 months to live can legally get drugs to end their lives. The diagnosis must be confirmed by 2 doctors. Supporters say this is a matter of personal autonomy and ending suffering. Opponents of the bill say it will erode respect for life and put pressure on the disabled to end theirs. 11 other states and the District of Columbia have legalized assisted suicide. Tara, this bill is now going to Governor Hochul. Should she sign it?
No, she shouldn't sign it, partially because there are not enough constraints built within it. One of the things, for example, that you have to have 2 doctors agree. Okay, that sounds great if these are doctors that have known you and truly know your case, but there is no restriction on a person having to be a resident of the state of New York. So you feasibly could have someone come from the state of Indiana who wants to be able to have this medically assisted suicide, come into the state, find 2 doctors who are willing to sign off and say, yes, this person should have medically assisted suicide, and they don't really know that person's case. They're just reading a file that they've sat down and read, hopefully for longer than 5 minutes, and we won't even get into whether or not they will have read it for more than that. Another issue of concern is it says, okay, that the 2 witnesses that you have to have cannot be people who inherit from you. You very easily could have a case where, okay, there's no will that says they're inheriting, but they've been your caregiver, and as they've been caring for you, you've given them a few things that won't show up in the fact that you have a will and they aren't supposed to inherit.
Mm-hmm. I put this in the context of an article that the New York Times wrote about 2 weeks ago about the pro-mortalist movement. It's something that began in 2006 with the publication of a book, Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence. At some level, it's about making death happen sooner rather than later in life. The Times called it fringe, except for that you can actually see elements of that philosophy in places like this act, which sends the message that some lives aren't worth living. I'm going to steal an idea from the journalist Madeleine Kearns, who says that this bill is not about individual rights, and she's pretty frank and says that people who want to end their lives already can do so. And so rather what this bill is about is that it would signal medical and societal approval for that choice, and in doing so, it'll have ethical implications that reach far beyond the patients that it's designed for, and just kind of reinforce this idea that some lives aren't.
Well, pushing back on Madeleine Kearns a little bit there, I mean, this gives somebody a more peaceful way to do it than would otherwise be the case.
I find the counter-arguments more convincing.
Jenny?
So I think that we need to really consider the argument that people do have a right to bodily autonomy. And if they find themselves in circumstances where they are facing a terminal illness with the potential for prolonged pain and suffering, that the ability to make the choice to end that pain and suffering on terms of their making is, from my perspective, something we really should enable and consider. I myself am actually quite in support of the idea that we should be able to make that choice if we are faced with certain circumstances. There should be guardrails, 100%. This bill lacks also any psychological evaluation. So if somebody, you can imagine circumstances where somebody is deeply depressed after getting such sad news. And so we need to make sure that people aren't making a hasty decision. But we are facing an increasingly aging population. I myself potentially have longevity genes and also Alzheimer's in my own genetics. And so when I think about my own potential future death, there are circumstances I don't want to experience.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a difficult issue, as the comments have shown. I think the bill is pretty narrowly tailored in terms of how it works, being confined to terminal illness. I think the multiple doctors is a good approach. I think the doctor is licensed in any state. That's sufficient for me. I trust their credentials in that regard. To Chad's point, I understand what you're saying about societal concerns, but I think we've all unfortunately encountered people who have been suffering from cancer and other horrible diseases, and the implication of your argument is that they should shoot themselves in the head or take enough drugs to kill themselves rather than, as Dave alluded to, have a more humane way to choose to end their life. So I think this is something that New York needs to do. Many other states have. And interestingly, I'll add, it's not just suffering. The state of Oregon was the first to initiate this type of law. They did a survey last year of people who went down this road. And loss of bodily control and autonomy and dignity was really the top reason that people did this. If you can't control your bodily fluids, you feel like you're a burden on your family members and you're suffering, people don't want to live. And I think legally they should have the right to make that determination under reasonable circumstances.
But to Tara's point, I think that there's a different discussion between, say, the laws that Washington or Oregon have and what this particular New York law is doing. I mean, this New York law doesn't have the same safeguards that other states have, including, for example, that there's no waiting period between requesting and receiving the drugs that will end your life, whereas every other state has at least 2 weeks. There are also concerns. I don't like appealing to slippery slope arguments.
So then don't.
But it's one that's been fronted a lot of times, and it's real. Okay, so Canada began its death with dignity kind of things under the same grounds that you're talking about, but it has now led to a move from just for terminal cases to chronic ones. And now you have 5% of deaths in Canada are attributable to medical assistance. And in 2027, mental illness is going to be covered. And so instead of treating people for chronic illnesses and mental illness, we are basically saying that life is not worth living, end it. Then there's all kinds of other pressures here. Fundamentally, what I think happens here, this kind of law preys on the vulnerable and people who can fall victim to family members and insurance companies who can stand to benefit from their death, either directly or indirectly.
Although it's only 6 months, right? I mean, I think that's something, you basically have to have a terminal illness and 6 months. And so I don't see the slippery slope there.
That's again, if we're talking about the narrow
Time.
all right.